Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Drupal Chat. I'm Mark Isaacson and I'm the host. You can find me on drupal.org at Vegan Triathlete. Today I'm going to talk about the examples module. And the point of the examples module is to give people a way to learn how to utilize some of Drupal's API. So to read right off the project page from the examples module, the examples for developers project aims to provide high quality, well-documented API examples for a broad range of Drupal core functionality. So this is going to be geared more so probably towards the developer type of Drupal talent than like a site builder or a themer. So I'll dig right into it now. So the first thing that you need to do, as with any modules that are available on Drupal, is to download them and install them onto your site. And the examples module can be installed just as any other module is installed. So if you use the directory sites, all modules contrib, you would take the tarball or the zip file and you would place it right under the sites, all modules contrib directory. And then you would go to your site and you would enable it. So I'm going to start walking through the process of how you might use the examples module. And I'm not going to get into a great amount of detail because I can't screen share on Blab. And so I'm going to talk about things in general, but I do want to give a bit of a walkthrough of how a person might use the examples module. And then I'll give a couple of the examples that I've looked at myself to get my head around how a few things work. So the first thing you would do after you unpack the tarball or the zip file, and assuming that you're not using Drush, is that you would go to your modules page and you can scroll down. And I'm using the module filter module, so forgive me if I talk about things in terms of how module filter presents the page, and I forget about the fact that maybe not everybody's using module filter. But I look for the section on the site where we've got the project that's called example modules. And so the first thing you might think would be a reasonable thing to do would be to enable the module that's called examples for developers. And that's would be a fine place to start. The strange thing is, though, that when you enable that module, nothing happens on your site. There are no menu items that appear. If you look at the help text, there's no help text that appears either. And if you look, there's no configuration to be done for that module. So it's kind of a strange thing that here that you would think that perhaps that would be the main thing that you would need to enable first of all, and yet nothing happens. And so I'm just going to jump quickly here into having a look at what is or is not in the examples.module and examples.info to give an idea of exactly how we start putting things together and what Drupal does require for you to create a module. So when I go into the code, let's just take a quick look at the examples.info file, and that's got your typical stuff in there, nothing too unusual. It's got the name and the description and what package it's a part of. I always confuse package and project. I think I said I look for the project that says examples module earlier. I should have said the package that says examples module. That's where all of the different examples are included. So it's got the example modules is the name of the package. And this, in my situation, I'm looking at Drupal 7. So it's meant for the core says 7.x. So nothing unusual in the .info file. So I'm going to take a jump over to the .module file, and this will give the answers for why we didn't see anything happen on the site. So if you look at the .module file, you'll see that there's just a bunch of comments inside of it. Yeah, and there is a function that implements hook help, but it's an empty function. So that's why we don't see any help on the site. There's no hook menu implementations. That's why we don't see any menu items. And so what we really have here is more or less an empty .module file. And in fact, it could be a completely empty .module file. If we've got the .info, even with an empty .module file, it will still show up in your modules page. So there really is nothing at all that is happening with the examples.module file. They're just giving a bit of comments in there, doxygen type comments mostly, and that's all that's going on in that module. So that's why I don't see anything when you enable it. And that may be a bit surprising or counterintuitive to people who are looking to learn to do some things. So one might argue that it would be a good idea to at least have some help text there. And I might argue that myself. So I might look to contribute a patch to the examples module to at least put some help text in there so that when somebody enables that module, they'd be able to go to the help text on the site and see that this module really isn't meant to do anything. So there you go. You say, all right, we've enabled that, and started out a bit confusing, but dig into the code and you see there's not too much going on there. So you're going to want to pick something that actually makes something happen on your site. So go back to the modules page and look at that example modules package, and you can start scrolling through the different modules that are part of that whole package there. And the first thing you might do is take a look at dependencies. And what you'll notice is that for the most part, almost all of the modules stand alone. There are very few dependencies, except of course where they're going to be working with something where there's naturally going to be a dependency for them to be able to work with that. I would argue that maybe some of these other examples should have some dependencies. But again, so I'm not going to get into too much technical detail here. So you might start out by just looking through the other examples there that are in that package besides the main one that's called the Examples for Developers module. And what I would say maybe you would start out with when you would look at this is something that would seem fairly simple for you. And so the page example I would suggest would be an example that would be a good place for you to start. Let's see about how to create a page on the site. So we enable the page example module, and then sure enough, we see that there's some help text there, and there is a link in the navigation menu. Now, where you might have even thought to look at any of that is if you've read some of the descriptions on the project page. So I'm going to hop back to the project page one more time here and scroll down the page a little bit and how to use these modules. You can enable these modules just like any others. They all add menu items, leading you to a page on your site that will tell you what they are doing. But you wouldn't necessarily know what menu items they were going to add the functionality to. So we've enabled the page example module, and one of the things that you will notice when you're on the modules page, or if you just click the help text link, is now there is help that's available. So if you go to the help page, you see a bit of text at the top that says, this is help text created in the page examples second case. And then there's a link to take you to the page example administration pages so that you can configure permissions. So let's just take a quick look here. If we go under structure and then menus, and we go to the navigation menu and we list links, we will see that there's the page example menu link, and then there's a child link under that that says simple, no arguments. So if we click on the page example link, we're taken to the page example page, and it says the page example provides two pages, simple and arguments. The simple page just returns a renderable array for display. The arguments page takes two arguments and displays them as in http://Drupal/example/arguments/23/56. So if we click on the link that says the simple page, we are taken to a page. It's given the title, simple, no arguments. And then we see a box that appears there that says, this is help text for the simple page. And then below that it says, simple page, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. I can use the back arrow on my browser to get back to where I was before. And if I click on the arguments page link, it says argument information. First number was 23, second number was 56. The total was 79. And if I wanted to explore things on my own, I could say, well, gee, let me see what happens if I substitute something else into the 23 and the 56. So maybe I would put in something like 19 and 20, and I will press enter. And then I see, okay, sure enough, argument information. First number was 19, second number was 20. The total was 39. So we're seeing, this example in action right now. And so let's take a look at the code for the page example module. So when I take a look at page_example, one of the first things I see is there's this .test file. And so you might wonder, what is this .test file that appears there? And what that is doing is it gives you a way, if you went into the modules interface again, and you looked for the Drupal's testing interface. So if I scroll down, it's in core. And if you scroll down through core and look at the testing, which is the simple test module, that .test module is just providing some tests that you can run through simple test on your site. So here you're getting an example to see maybe how to start writing some simple tests for your modules. And that's all that I'm going to say about the test module right now. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here. Let's take a quick look at the info file. And one thing that we see different in here than in the examples.info file is we do have this files array declaration that says page example.test. Otherwise, it's still pretty much the same as what we've seen with the other info file. So let's take a look at the .module file now. And you're going to see that now there actually is more code in there. And so at the top, you see there's implements hook help. And so you're getting an example of how to use hook help now. And they've got a couple of cases, and the cases are based on the path. And if you look at what you see there, that'll correspond to what you were seeing when you poked around in the interface. Below that, you see implements hook permission. And I didn't go into the configuration screen, but this is how you could set things up to decide to determine who's allowed to do things like accessing the simple page or accessing the arguments page. So you're getting a chance to see hook permission. What I'm more interested in having a bit of discussion about here is that we see the hook menu. And when you look at the Doxygen comments at the top there, there's quite a bit of them, first of all. But near the end, it says @C menu_example. And so you can get the idea here when you looked at the page and you start scrolling through the items that they're defining there. And there's a few of them. There's not too many. Then you might get the idea like, gee, maybe I should look at the menu examples module. So I'm just going to quickly finish scrolling through the module here. So we've got the hook menu, and there are let's see, there's 1, 2, 3 paths that are defined, and we've actually seen all of those paths just in what I've described so far. And then as we scroll down, there is the a function that's called page example description. And if you search in your document, you will see that maps to the page callback for the example/page example. And then there's a page example simple function, which maps to the page callback for the examples/page example/simple. And then finally, you will see that there's the page example arguments function. And that's all the pieces that are in there. So this is a pretty good example module for you to get started with, because the .module file is quite small and there's not a whole lot for you to digest, and it's pretty easy for you to find those things in the interface when you're playing around. So following along with the suggestion that was in the page example module, they said @C menu example. So maybe we should have a look at the menu example module. And when we enable that module, we do then see how there are lots of menu items added to the navigation menu, including some of them that are nested deeper. One thing that I'm not seeing though is any help text. And so if we take a look at our examples module and go to the modules page, the only thing that we do see next to menu example is the option to go to the permissions. So I'm not going to go through all of the items that are defined in menu example because it is pretty extensive, and I'm not looking to get into detail about how you use hook menu. But one thing that I will note is that if we go into the code and we look at menu underscore example, and again, you're going to see there's a .test file, and there's its .info file that declares the .test file. If we go into the .module file, if you search on underscore help, you will see that it's not found anywhere in that text file. So indeed, there is no help text that has been defined for the menu example module. And again, one might argue that it would be kind of nice to have a bit of help text for that so that people don't need to dive into the code immediately. If we look through the other examples here that are in the example modules package, you will see that there is no example module for help example. So if you want to learn about that, you're going to pretty much need to look at the way the implements hook underscore help is done in these other modules. So taking a look at those two things is just a way to start getting our head around how do we use the examples module. And I picked those first two examples because I think that they're fairly easy to understand and be able to align the code with the functionality that you're seeing on the site when you start to play around with things, and not get too overwhelmed. Notwithstanding the fact that the examples project is designed to make things that are pretty much drop dead easy to understand, but still putting some of the pieces together can be a bit more confusing as you get into some more of the complicated examples. So having started with those two simple examples, I will just now talk about a couple of examples that I have used to figure out how to implement some functionality on a Drupal site. And so one of the example modules that I looked at was the cron example module. Now I knew about hook cron previously, so that wasn't tricky for me to deal with. But what I didn't know about was this hook cron q info. And this is a long time ago that I looked at that example in the module, so I don't honestly remember at this point. When I looked up on the api.drupal.org at hook cron q info, if I was able to understand it from there or not. But once I got a chance to look at the cron example module, I was able to get a much clearer picture about what exactly you're doing with this hook cron q info and how you use queues and the workers that are specified in the worker callbacks. Now, the biggest thing that I needed to learn about hook cron q info was the fact that you want to make sure that your workers are always completing successfully, because what happens with hook cron q info is that Drupal takes care of popping an item off that queue and feeding it to your worker callback. Well, I should say it takes care of popping it out of the queue if the worker callback succeeds. If the worker callback hangs, then that item never gets popped out of that queue. And then what ends up happening is that that just keeps getting called over and over again every time cron runs again. And then the other items in the queue never get processed because the worker callback just keeps on bailing in the middle of it. So that was one piece that was not immediately obvious to me based on having looked at the cron example module. But nonetheless, looking at that module gave me an idea of how to get started using hook cron queue info. And then the second example that I will talk about now is the Ajax functionality. Now, I'm not a front-end developer, and so for me, doing these types of things that are more typically handled by front-end developers were a bit tricky. And I did have a need on a project, this is quite some time ago, to create these dependent drop-downs. And so fortunately, I was able to go to the example modules, and look at the Ajax example and play around a bit with that module to see how it was doing its dependent dropdowns, because it actually has some examples of the dependent dropdowns in there. And so, you know, I enabled it. I played around with the page to see what it was doing. And the biggest takeaways that I needed to get from looking at that module was the understanding of the order in which the functions end up being fired when that Ajax response is happening. And in short, what does actually end up happening when the Ajax response is fired is that your form builder function does get called again in the order that things are specified in there. And so it's as though you're running through that form builder again. And so that's why when you look at your Ajax callback, typically all that you're doing is returning some form element. And the key that ties all of this together is that when you specify the Ajax callback that you're going to use in the Ajax functionality, you also specify what the wrapper element is that's going to be replaced. And so the second thing that I needed to learn after playing with this over a bit of time was that I had a situation in which I had a number of different form elements that had dependencies. And so when I made certain selections, I needed a number of the form elements to then be changed. And so it took me a little bit of time before I came up with the idea of wrapping the entire form in a div so that the whole form itself was replaced. No, I'm not saying that this is something that you want to do every time. This is something that solved a problem for me in a particular situation. You can have as many Ajax callbacks as you want. You can have as many wrappers as you want on the specific elements so that you aren't necessarily replacing the entire form when you go through this Ajax process. But it was very helpful for me to be able to start to get my head around this whole Ajax process by looking at the examples module that did this, because I really wouldn't have understood on my own that what was happening is as simple as just returning an element, because that was kind of counterintuitive to me. I thought, well, how can I return an element? Like, when did I actually do the work to do something with that element? When am I actually doing this replacement here? And it was through the process of playing around with the module that I got to see, oh, I see where the element's being built. It's being built in the normal flow of when the form is being built, because you can look at your form state variable. So what's happening is when you first build the form, there's nothing in your form state. variables. And when you come back to that form builder function again, there will be things that will be populated in your form state variables. And then you could have other functions that are then doing things based on what's in that form state variable. And this is how the pieces start to come together, that you've now done something to populate an element on the page that then just needs to be returned so that it can be substituted into that wrapper div and bring about the change that you need, that you desire with this Ajax functionality. So that gives you an idea about using the examples module. I hope that you found it to be helpful for you, and that will give you a bit of encouragement that as you're learning to do different things, that you might consider having a look at the examples module. And in fact, what I'm considering doing in May, when I'm going to be at DrupalCon New Orleans, depending what else I've got going on at that time, that I'll be there sprinting on Friday and on Saturday. And I may, in fact, spend my time sprinting on those 2 days to take the existing examples modules and port them to Drupal 8. So I could start getting a little bit of hands-on experience with how things are done in Drupal 8. If you've got any further questions or comments on today's Drupal chat, you can find the replay uploaded at the link I've placed at the end of the chat here. I've got Discuss, however you prefer to pronounce that, installed on the site, and you may feel free to leave your comments there, or you can feel free to ping me through my Twitter account, and I will be happy to continue the conversation with you. So that wraps it up for today's Drupal chat in the examples module, and I look forward to getting the opportunity to hear from you and interact with you on upcoming Drupal chats. Ta-ta for now.